Awesome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our April Tech Talk. I'm José Gaona, President and CEO of ZETA, Gen Z Emerging Technology Action. I'm so glad that we're having this conversation today. It's so important in today's world, in the digital world. The topic of today's conversation is promoting internet access and digital literacy. At ZETA, we really do believe that technology should work for everyone, not just those who already have access or know how to use it. And yet today in 2025, we're still seeing major gaps in who can get online, who knows how to use digital tools, and who's being left behind by the systems meant to connect us. Whether you're tuning in from a city, a rural community, or a college campus, you're part of this conversation, and we hope you'll leave not just informed, but activated today. I'm joined today by two incredible leaders working at the intersection of tech, policy, connectivity, and community impact. First up, I'd like to introduce and welcome Yahaira Cáceres, the Government Relations Manager at the National Young Farmers Coalition. Yahaira works on the front lines of food justice and federal policy, advocating for young farmers, many of whom are facing serious connectivity challenges in rural areas. She brings a grounded and powerful perspective on what it means to build digital infrastructure where it matters most for our farmers. We also have joining us Jisoo Song, Director of Projects and Initiatives at SETDA, the State Education Technology Directors Association, and former Digital Equity Advisor at the U.S. Department of Education. Jisoo has shaped national broadband and digital literacy policy from the highest levels of government and continues to lead efforts that ensure every student, worker, and community member has the tools they need to thrive. Please help me and give them a warm welcome. It's really nice to have you, Yahaira and Jisoo. How are you both doing today?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk today.
Yeah, I'm so excited that the both of you are with us, and this conversation really is geared towards folks that are maybe a little bit new to the topic of broadband connectivity. I think it's fair to say that, looking at our audience, Gen Z, most of them know what the internet is, or at the very least how to use it. But very rarely do we take a step back to talk about this broader connectivity ecosystem and the historical context and important policy conversations around the internet. And so I think this conversation is really, really important to have, particularly because Gen Z is the most digitally connected generation, right? Before we dive into the conversation, I actually want to go through a little bit of a background for folks that, again, are new to the conversation to help them get an understanding of some key terms. So I'm going to go ahead and start by going into a little bit of a narrative. The internet is the giant global network that connects all of our devices. Phones, laptops, smart TVs. It lets us share information, communicate, and even work online. It's letting us connect right now through this webinar. But getting online takes more than just having a device. It depends on the infrastructure that connects us. That's where broadband comes in. Broadband is high-speed, always-on internet, strong enough to power everything from virtual learning and remote work to telehealth appointments and streaming your favorite shows on your favorite streaming service. Without it, everyday activities can become much harder, and a lot of opportunities in the economy stay out of reach. Broadband can be delivered in different ways. Some communities are still connected through copper cables, the older wires originally built for landline phones. They can carry internet, but they're a little slower, or a lot slower, and weren't designed for the demands of today's digital world. Then you have things like fiber optic cables, tiny strands of glass that move data at the speed of light. These fibers offer some of the fastest and most reliable internet connections available today. In more remote or rural areas, where it's harder or more expensive to lay cables underground, people often rely on satellite internet, which beams signals from satellites orbiting the Earth. It's a great option for hard-to-reach places for folks to get internet, although weather and distance can sometimes make it a little bit slower or unreliable. No matter how we connect, whether it's from Wi-Fi at home, using data on our phones on the go, everything that we use to access that internet relies on spectrum. Think of spectrum like invisible highways in the air, that carry the signals we use to text, scroll, zoom, and connect virtually. Over time, the mobile networks riding on that spectrum have evolved quite a lot. From 1G, which was all about using voice calls, making phone calls on some of those first cell phones, to 2G, which brought us digital texting and better sound quality, to 3G, which introduced mobile internet for the first time. A little bit slow compared to today's mobile internet, but it opened web browsing and even video calls for cell phones. Then we had 4G, which made everything faster, powering the world of streaming, gaming, and high-quality video on your phone. And now 5G is here, offering much faster speeds, virtually no lag, and making things like smart cities, real-time healthcare, and even self-driving cars possible. That's a long highway of progress, isn't it? But even with all of these advances, not everyone has what they need to actually get online and stay connected. Digital access means more than just having a network nearby. It's about having affordable devices, affordable service, and a strong, reliable connection that people can realistically use in their daily lives. And even then, access alone is not enough. Digital literacy, the skills to use technology safely and efficiently, is just as important. It's about knowing how to navigate online classes, apply for jobs, recognize scams, and be a part of digital communities. When people lack either the access or the skills, we call this the digital divide or the digital gap. And bridging that divide matters because today, being connected isn't a luxury anymore. It's essential for opportunity, security, and belonging in the digital world. With that foundation in mind, let's dive into today's conversation. All right, we're going to dive into some questions now. And again, I just want to thank you all for that. I think it's really important to set that ground for folks to understand what is it we're talking about and why is it so important for everybody in the context of the work of Yahaira and Jisoo today. The first topic that we're going to explore, who's being left behind, the access gaps in rural and urban America both. Yahaira, I'm going to go ahead and start with you with our first question. Not everyone has the same internet experience as we're starting to learn. From your work with young farmers, what are some of the biggest connectivity challenges that they're facing today? And how does that impact their ability to run businesses and carry out their work?
Yeah. Again, thank you for having me. So young farmers, especially in rural areas, are often farming in regions where broadband infrastructure simply doesn't exist or where it's too slow and unreliable for modern business needs. According to our 2022 National Survey report, 30% of young farmers identified accessing broadband internet on their farm as somewhat very or extremely challenging. And more specifically, 23% reported as very or extremely challenging. So, for instance, a young farmer in Oklahoma shared that she has to drive 15 miles into town just to upload farm's online orders. Another farmer told us that spotty internet has made it impossible to access digital tools for conservation grants. Without strong internet, farmers can't easily market their products or access real-time weather data, download soil test results, apply to critical USDA programs, operate precision tech like GPS guided tractors, access telehealth services, as that's a huge issue as well, affecting farmers, and or even join like online communities that could help improve their practices.
Yeah. I think that's so important to highlight and flag because, we are building a new generation of farmers, Gen Z, right? And as we integrate into these industries, we do have that benefit or that skill set of knowing how to be digitally connected, right? And applying that skill set to our industries. But that doesn't help very much if those barriers to access are still there, right? Like, how are we evolving, particularly in that agricultural industry, if folks can't get online to like sell their product, right? I mean, that's pretty like fundamental. Um, and I'm sure that like as we continue to grow as a population and we need to be more efficient with our agricultural product, that's going to continue to be a problem for young farmers, right? Yeah. Jisoo, I'm going to throw it to you for our next question. So, rural areas often dominate this conversation around access, but urban connectivity deserts exist too. And we know this disproportionately impacts some of our students in urban areas. What can you tell us about what's driving some of these gaps and how they might be harder to solve in some of these urban locations?
Yeah, during your introduction, you mentioned my time at the U.S. Department of Ed, and when I was over there, we had a series of national conversations intended to produce some guidance for leaders when it comes to developing and implementing state and local digital equity plans. And during that series of conversations, we had a roundtable focused specifically on the needs of geographically urban areas. And during those conversations, we learned that there can be a lot of different reasons for connectivity issues in regions that we might consider well connected just because they're in cities, right? And we use what we've been calling the 3A framework to sort of like organize those gaps. The first A is the availability of a connection, right? We know that in a lot of cities, there's been decades of underinvestment in under-resourced areas. We call that digital redlining, right? And those areas may not have adequate like middle mile connectivity. So connecting the major community institutions to the internet backbone, and old buildings, the design of those buildings, the materials that those buildings are built on may prevent sort of wired and wireless solutions from reaching some populations as well. So availability is the first A. Second, affordability, and this is the biggest piece that's causing a lot of headaches right now, is affordability, right? It's one of the most pressing challenges that disconnect a lot of families. We know that at least a third of all U.S. households are what we say subscription vulnerable, which is, they have difficulties in maintaining a connectivity subscription from month to month just because it's really, really expensive for them, right? So that's the second A. And then the third A is adoption, right? And this can be really specific to the issues faced by different populations. For example, state and local governments might provide benefits to help sort of drive down that affordability problem, right? But if you're unhoused, right, you might need a permanent address to access those benefits that would help you get that connectivity. Or if you're an immigrant population, right, you might be hesitant with interact government entities that provide benefits because it requires you to produce a lot of information. You may not speak their language and things like that, right? So that's the third A, adoption. So all these availability, affordability, adoption challenges can look differently depending on your geographical region, but all three sort of happens to manifest in the urban regions as well as rural areas.
Yeah, I think that's an important flag here, right? We're talking about that unique experience because as someone who grew up in rural America, I know what it's like to have that lag or to have that delay in connection, to not be able to stream the shows you want to stream as quickly as you'd like, or to constantly have to see that buffer symbol that haunts you as you're like trying to watch your favorite show or whatever it is. But some of these barriers are shared, right, across that geography, whether you're rural or urban. I think we can look at some of those A's. I think those three A's are a good a marker to look at for all communities, and I know particularly affordability is a big one for a lot of folks, for a lot of young folks, younger Gen Z who are still students in high school, of course, who maybe rely on family for access. Particularly at ZETA, I know we've put out some content in support of programs like the Affordable Connectivity Program and the subsidized funding for connectivity that provided over its course tens of millions of families across the U.S. So we'll talk a little bit more about that coming up, but thank you both on that. I'll open up this question to the both of you. How does poor access to reliable internet hold people back, particularly maybe within the communities that you've worked with? What are some anecdotes that you all could share?
I can kick us off. And we talked extensively about this in a policy report that we produced earlier this year called the Universal Connectivity Imperative, right? We know from the research, and it's clear, connectivity sets the necessary conditions for a lot of different things that we consider important as a country, right? There's positive links between student performance and the extent to which that they're connected to reliable, affordable service, both on and off campus, right? And then there's access to public information, public health information online, telehealth services, mental wellness resources that are available online that makes the link between connectivity and overall well-being really strong there. And then, one more level up, we know that there's links between academic achievement, overall lifetime income, GDP contributions. So it's not like connectivity just has individual benefits. It has returns on societal benefits as well. So that's why we've been advocating for both federal and local level policies that really, benefit students in the long run.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great point.
oh, and so on the farming side, reliable internet is no longer a luxury for farmers, it's a business lifeline. And poor internet access means that they are locked out of modern markets, modern farm management. Without it, young farmers can run online stores, fronts, access affordable continuing education, or tap into markets beyond their local town. Young farmers are some of the most tech-forward farmers that we've seen up to this point, and they want to integrate soil sensors or manage smart irrigation systems or market directly to consumers. But at the lack of broadband freezes them in place. And one young farmer said it best, without good internet, I'm stuck farming like it's 1995, but selling into a 2025 economy. Young farmers directly market prefer direct market sales, and usually consumers find them on social media or word of mouth. Young farmers are innovative and resilient and can often pivot, but we need to create infrastructure for that. And digital exclusion directly limits their economic mobility and opportunities to innovate. And that means fewer young people choosing to stay in farming, which is also an issue as the average farmer is 65 years old, and an aging farming population is not sustainable for the future as well. So we need to support young people in farming as well.
That's a really impactful message, right? Because you think about agriculture in that um, in that context of American society. Like agriculture is held in such a high regard. Our farmers, right? Our American farmers, and we produce so much. And I think about that Gen Z craze, right? Like I know Gen Z is very big on like locally sourced and like farmers markets and building those connections to be able to engage with like local farmers, but also like present the opportunities for Gen Z to enter that space without the like concerns or maybe like turnoffs that they're not going to be connected or that the industry is dated, like operating in 1995. That's also a really good, I think, message to share. Because it hits, right? Like, wow, like that's a long time ago in terms of time now, but also in terms of like the tech and the advancements, the fact that we're still kind of that far behind as it's perceived by our young folks that are in the farming space is crazy. We got to catch up, right? Um, digital access is one thing, and I know we're kind of talking about that here. Digital literacy is something else, right? Jisoo, as I kind of go into this next section around literacy, I have a question for you. What exactly is digital literacy in your work, and why is it just as critical as the access itself?
Yeah, and we try to define this in some of the guidance that we produced at the federal government. And we were able to come up with a definition of the skills associated with using technology to enable users to find, evaluate, create, and communicate information. And, with the advent of a lot of AI-powered tools, I think digital literacy skills are, even more important nowadays, right? Once we get communities connected, it's really important that we empower them with the skills that are necessary to meet their goals and needs using that technology, right? There's a lot of challenges with digital literacy right now. I mentioned the AI-powered tools coming into play, but there's in the education world, the discourse around, the appropriate role of screen time, right? How do we make sure that our students, our younger students especially, have the necessary digital literacy skills to differentiate between good screen time versus, not the most ideal screen time, right? We also collected some data at the U.S. Department of Education, and we found that these digital literacy and digital skill supports often do reach a lot of our K-12 students from schools, but they often fail to reach their families, right? And we know from survey data that the families do want to increase their digital literacy skills to be able to help students from home because a lot of their assignments and a lot of school communications are online nowadays. So there's that disparity between what reaches our students and what reaches their families, right? So what's being done? We know that states are sort of leading the way here right now. They're incorporating like digital literacy, digital citizenship skills into core learning standards, deploying some personnel to help with digital skill development. For example, in my home state of Washington, they're offering local districts with digital navigator grants, through which a lot of districts are hosting things like multilingual workshops to help parents and caregivers get those skills to be able to help their students from home. So the way forward, we're going to need more technical assistance from a system level standpoint to help schools and districts create some really good educational technology plans that emphasizes digital skill development. Our organization, ZETA, we do a annual trend survey supported by the Siegel Family Endowment. And in last year's survey, we found that 90% of respondents said that their state does not require districts to develop a dedicated ed tech plan. So there's more to be done there when it comes to a system level effort to increase digital skills and digital literacy. Up at the federal level, we know there are several proposals and considerations in Congress to offer funding for digital skill building efforts, especially when it comes to AI literacy. I know there was that AI literacy executive order that came out into the public last week. So really looking forward to see what the impact of that work will be. So yeah, a lot of challenges going on right now, but it's not like we're sitting on our hands doing nothing. There's things that are going on both at the federal and state level.
I think that's really interesting to hear that there's such a large ecosystem, right? That's engaging at that federal, at that state level, locally, within our educational systems and communities to promote that digital literacy because it is so important. And particularly excited to hear that you all are working with very good friends of ours, the Siegel Family Endowment, as well, on some of those findings. Yahaira, I want to turn it over to you. I'm particularly interested to kind of get an understanding of how it is that young farmers are engaging with some of these digital tools, right? Can you tell us a little bit about how farming as a whole is shifting as a result of some of these advancements in the way that technology is entering farming, agriculture, that speak to that digital literacy need in farming?
Yeah. So digital literacy for young farmers means everything from knowing how to operate online markets, being able to navigate USDA loan portals, operate precision ag software, which is more on the technical side, and using like satellite imagery to make planning decisions that improve sustainability. But digital literacy also means for farmers today is really about customer service and ease of access, not just training programs. When young farmers go to apply for a loan, check conservation programs, or comply with certification standards, they need systems that are intuitive, responsive, and built on the realities of rural life in mind. And right now, too many young farmers are running into confusing websites, slow response times, systems that feel like they're built for someone else, or just aging technology or that only tailor to traditional farming methods. And we really want to bridge the digital divide. We need to strip away the red tape and focus on making digital tools easy to use with strong customer service support at agencies like the USDA. Farmers are busy. They don't have time to spend hours troubleshooting online portals. and after a full day in the fields. Good digital access means also having a real person to call, a clear path to help, and systems that respect farmers' times. And they can't do that if they don't have any service where they're at.
Yeah.
So it's both like infrastructure means both like physical and also having that cultural, I guess, competence to support farmers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting, right? Like because my assumption would be like these younger farmers are Gen Z, so they're tech savvy, they know how to use the internet, but there's a lot of complicated work that goes into taking advantage of like federal funds, going through some of these application portals or processes that require the internet, right? And so it's not just like the access itself that maybe folks are familiar with or using a laptop or a tablet, which they're familiar with if they're Gen Z farmers, right? But it's also then navigating some of the more complex systems. Would you say that, like, with the younger farmers that you all are working with, they do have that kind of Gen Z stereotypical, like, better understanding of the internet than some of the other generations of farmers that have come by?
Yeah, but as we know, there's so many new technology in agriculture in general that just also it's like needing that technical assistance and support from universities or FSA offices to really support them in applying the knowledge that they do have. Of course, anyone could like do a quick Google search, but a lot of this is more nuanced and complex.
Yeah.
And so if of course we have like farmers that have the basic, I guess, skills, but then it requires more support infrastructure wise.
Yeah. And to do that Google search, you need the access, right? And then, like you said, these are folks that are also working super hard and they don't necessarily have the time sometimes to figure out how to navigate these systems on their own while also managing a farm. I mean, that's not easy work for anyone that has ever, like, been around that work. It's super labor intensive. And so that infrastructure, that access and literacy are important. I would open up this question to both of you. In kind of your work around that Gen Z population, what would you say around digital literacy is the biggest or is are some of the biggest challenges, um, particularly for Gen Z in digital literacy? Like, is it what is it? Is it like learning how to apply and use AI? Is it like yeah, what would you all say is like the biggest hurdle that Gen Z is getting over when it comes to digital literacy?
Feel free to go first. Yeah.
Oh, I should go first.
Yeah.
That's totally fine with me. I feel like I've been answering these questions first, so
Yeah. Yeah, Haida, it sounded like you were maybe saying that the biggest hurdles in the context of your work was some of these portals or application sites that make up, a lot of the farming infrastructure that farmers in the US have to go through. Um, would you say that's like the biggest hurdle you all as like young farmers kind of deal with, or is there another like technical hurdle that like you all are seeing a lot of folks flag for you all?
Yeah, so I can't speak more on the technical side of um, internet access and I guess like connectivity since that's not my policy wheelhouse. But at the same time, we are seeing, like I was saying, like digital literacy also means being able to um, have just also navigate these systems that require internet. But at the same time, I think the first baseline issue is just having sustainable and reliable connectivity so they could just have access to it to begin with. So I think it's like a two-part issue. Like without internet, we can't learn more about how to navigate these systems that require the more tech that are required also to like the GPS and all these precision agriculture tools that are now available to them if they just don't have internet access that's like reliable.
And I think some of those hurdles to come might be interesting as well, particularly in agriculture, because when we think about, the way that conversations around AI have started to build out, one of those bigger application areas that is talked about is AI and the ability for it to supplement farming, right? And the tools that farmers have at their disposal to better understand their crop, their yields, their farming practices. Um, and that is a budding conversation in the space of quantum computing, as well, and the thought around what the applications for like quantum computing might be in the future, right? Like, what is all that added capacity that it'll bring to farming? But obviously, it can't do that if our farmers don't know how to use those tools and engage with them. And so I'm sure those will continue to evolve as well, like some of those challenges that we'll have to overcome. Jisoo, I'll throw the same question over to you, thinking about kind of those larger barriers around digital literacy for our generation.
It's very rare nowadays that you'll find a job where you come across a problem and it can be solved using a single digital tool, right? It requires you to sort of have like a stack of different, software that you can deploy at any given moment to be able to solve that issue, right? It can be anywhere from just like being able to use email all the way to, what they call vibe coding nowadays, right? So, we called that skill when I was at the federal government, digital resilience, right? When you come across a novel issue, whether in the workplace or not, how can you make sure that you're being adaptive and using different resources that are available to you to be able to solve that problem, right? Um, we know from our partners over at the National Skills Coalition that 92% of jobs right now require some level of digital skilling. So, if you don't have that sort of foundational digital resilience, within your cards, like it's going to be really hard for you to succeed in this really competitive workforce landscape that we find ourselves, right? And you mentioned AI, the rapid adoption of these emerging technologies by industries are just going to accelerate this trend. I've seen report after report around like a lot of junior level jobs are being impacted because a lot of people are thinking, hey, maybe I can replace that thing that this person used to do, right? So how can you make sure that you can, gain those digital resilience skills to show that, okay, like AI can do this one thing really well, but in solving those not problems in a very novel, creative way, this is where I come in, right? So that's something that I've been thinking about nowadays, like, and how resilience becomes a big factor in success in the workforce. Yeah.
I love that, that you're bringing up, in part because we do some work around workforce development in the digital age, and that's one of our focus areas. And it looks a lot at reskilling, automation, resilience, and there's so much conversation there as well around how our generation will be shaped by the evolution of AI in the workplace. And of course, for all of that to happen, or for you to even be competitive as a worker, right? Like in this digital economy that continues to evolve so quickly, you need access and you need basic digital literacy. Um, I appreciate the comments from both of you on that. I want to go now into a section around the government and what the government is doing, because it takes a lot. It takes a lot of funding, a lot of coordination with local, state, and federal players to build the physical infrastructure, and the framework for all of this connectivity in the U.S., right? And the U.S. is very large, and so it takes a lot. It takes a lot of permitting. It takes a lot of funding to build out these systems, make them accessible, affordable to communities on the ground, so that people can be connected. And we've seen some really historic federal investments in broadband, right, over the last few years. Jisoo, specifically looking to you to talk about some of the impact of these investments, like some of the funding we saw from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and what they've done to support underserved and hard to reach communities.
You mentioned the Affordable Connectivity Program a couple
Hmm.
minutes ago, so I'll just go to that first because that was the program within IIJA that I was the most involved with, I think. Getting information out to eligible populations about eligible benefits is half the battle, right? Actually, rewind. I should probably mention what the ACP is in the first place, right? So its predecessor, the Emergency Broadband Benefit, allowed low-income households to apply for a $50 benefit, a discount off of your monthly internet subscription bills, right? And then the IIJA reduced that benefit to $30 per month, but expanded the scope of who's eligible, right? So it was a $14 billion program that came out during the pandemic and when the ACP was still a thing. At the U.S. Department of Education, we engaged in a public-private partnership with a network of over 400 organizations to promote the ACP in collaboration with the White House National Economic Council. We got a shout out from President Biden and Vice President Harris on this effort as well. We activated a lot of different community anchor institutions, including school districts, to share the information with eligible families. We launched a summer week of action around this program, and we got 1 million additional people signed up for the benefit. And in total, during the lifetime of the program, we were able to collaborate with the FCC, who ran that program to over 23 million eligible households, right? Many with K-12 students signed up for this program. Unfortunately, the program, as with a lot of different pandemic era funds, sunset last year, and SETA, along with a lot of different advocates that we're part of coalitions with, are advocating for additional funding for this critical program. It's been one of the most successful ways to reduce that affordability barrier for a lot of families. We've collected data point after data point, story after story around how successful this program was and the access that it gave to not just the internet, but workforce development opportunities, just public benefits overall, right? So we've been looking at legislation like the ACP Extension Act, which would provide an additional $7 billion towards the program. There's some talks around, hey, does it fit within the framework of other federal funds like the Universal Service Fund? So there's different policy options on the table right now, but we do know that we need some sort of permanent mechanism to address that affordability barrier.
Yeah. Going back to those three, A's that we were talking about earlier, affordability being one of those biggest barriers to access. I think there's an interesting context there, right? Because when you particularly look at Gen Z and the pandemic and connectivity, there's a really interesting experience. Gen Z during the pandemic was, those early career folks, college students, high school students, middle school students. So we were very much those students that were impacted by the pandemic and our inability to maybe engage with the educational institutions that we relied on for connectivity or for education physically. What happened during the pandemic, right? A lot of education went virtual. Campuses did virtual semesters. A lot of primary schools, handed out tablets, which also just didn't come out of thin air, right? Like for those students that needed devices to be able to access, their class instruction. They were provided tablets. They were provided internet access at home. That's what this funding was used for. That really was to the benefit of Gen Z a lot. And so you talk about all of the good things that was doing, and I think it makes a really strong argument for why we need programs that really look to bridge that access gap for a lot of our students. I've looked at those numbers of kind of what that difference is then for like the folks in those homes who are having to pay for connectivity with some of these programs versus not. It can make a huge difference in someone's budget on a monthly basis, in a family's budget on a monthly basis, to try to continue to stay connected after the sunsetting of these programs for the sake of their students' education. And so really, really valuable context there. And I appreciate you bringing up those programs and taking us through that timeline a little bit, Jisoo. Yahaira, I want to turn it over to you. I'm particularly interested to know, are there conversations, are there, some stories or context that you can share around the funding or some of these programs and their benefit to young farmers on the ground over the last few years?
Yeah, so we have been seeing progress, but it's slow. There has been important investments, especially from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, both of which included funding to expand rural broadband. Through these programs, more rural areas are being connected to high-speed internet, but on the ground, the rollout remains uneven. Some young farmers are finally seeing physical infrastructure being implemented near their communities, but many others are still stuck with unreliable satellite service or patchy connections, especially if farming outside small towns. And programs like USDA Reconnect funded in part through these laws have incredible potential, but now more than ever, it's critical to ensure that these programs continue to receive strong support. We are facing a growing number of federal funding freezes. Young farmers are already feeling the impact of delayed access to grants, slower expansion to broadband infrastructure, and fewer resources to help them modernize and sustain their operations. If we don't protect and strengthen the already existing broadband investments, we risk stalling the future of American agriculture at a time where innovation and connectivity is now more important than ever.
Hmm. I think that's a really big warning call to folks that we need to continue to invest in this infrastructure, in broadband deployment. I think it's interesting to think about the landscape that we're in today, right? Um, and to both of you, I would ask, looking forward at, the landscape, the way that we've had some of these programs that benefit community sunset, some set to expire in the coming year. What what should be our broadband priorities? Like what is the most critical to support our folks on the ground? I don't know if either of you would like to start it off there.
Yeah, looking towards the future, immediate future, actually, there's, I think, at least two things to be on the lookout for, at least in the education world, right? Um, the number one issue right now is the E-rate program, one of the most successful broadband programs, I think, in the country right now. So provides internet subscriptions to school buildings and libraries at a very discounted rate, right? Three-fourths of school buildings are connected to high-speed internet because of the E-rate program. And then the cost of connecting school buildings has drastically decreased over the past decade because of E-rate. But there's challenges to the program right now at the Supreme Court, questioning how the program is currently being funded and administered. So organizations like our organization, SETDA, have advocated for the protection of the program. So we'll see in, I think, around the June timeframe what SCOTUS decides to do, whether they decide to punt it over to Congress to fix some of the concerns that they have, or decide to keep the program as a whole. Who knows? But we'll have to be on the lookout for the future of the E-rate program. And then the E-rate program during the pandemic, the FCC, who runs the program, decided to offer some flexibilities for off-campus solutions, right? The FCC granted some flexibilities to allow things like hotspots to be covered under E-rate to offer students not being able to attend school, in a physical setting, to be able to access E-rate benefits as well, right? But there's been challenges led by, Senator Cruz about whether this is in line with the intent of the E-rate program. So SETA has worked with different coalitions to advocate for protecting this flexibility, since a modern educational environment will require connectivity beyond what we consider the traditional classroom. So those two things, the integrity of the E-rate program as a whole and some of the flexibilities that it sort of maintained during the pandemic. I think these are two things that we should be on the lookout for in the immediate future.
A really interesting flag around that traditional classroom label. I think that's fascinating to think about, especially post-pandemic, when we saw, the ability for our students to be educated virtually, and that opens up then a lot of conversations around the way that we're supplementing their ability to do that. They're really interesting. Yahaira, I don't know if you'd have anything to add on to that.
Yeah, so I think priorities are often created by communities on the ground, right? There's so many ways we could look at broadband, but I think something important to keep in mind moving forward is that many young farmers consistently tell us they need faster action, more transparency from the government, and also rural focused programs designs, keeping what they're struggling with and considering also them as a whole person. We also need the telehealth connectivity for that. We also need internet is so integrated in so many aspects of farmers' operations, of their health, their mental health. And so we just need to consider them as full people rather than just these are issue areas and policies that sometimes could leave that out when we focus too much on the technical end of things as well.
Yeah. Really well said. I appreciate that. And I think that is important to think about the way that we're looking at those issues from the perspective of our farmers, particularly, and thinking about solutions that are driven with those perspectives in mind. I want to take us to kind of our wrap up section here. Forward looking. What comes next for internet infrastructure, particularly as we continue to see an explosion in AI development, and an increase in our usage of the internet, our upload, our download as a generation. The number is like 99%, if not higher, of Gen Z that is online every single day, right? And so, with that in mind, with the increase of usage and the added, AI incorporation in the way that we're navigating the digital world, only continuing to grow. How does our infrastructure keep up? What do we need to continue to build out that network in in a physical sense and virtual sense? Jisoo, I don't know if you'd want to tackle this one.
I mean, it's really hard to answer right now because, a lot of the capabilities of artificial intelligence tools are just now beginning to sort of stir up in the industry, right? But the report that I mentioned earlier during this conversation, the Universal Connectivity Imperative report that our organization published back in January, it has a lot of policy recommendations, but it also closes out with several overarching recommendations that state and federal policymakers should consider as they work towards different policy goals. And the big thing that we highlighted was being adaptive, right? It's going to be inevitable that users in just a matter of years are going to demand additional bandwidth, geographic areas that we consider, well served right now. It might be inadequately served in just a matter of years. So federal and state policymakers will need to be, really flexible as they determine the types of technologies that different programs support, right? We know that fiber is scalable, but who knows what other things, might be out there that serve different populations and geographies better. And then we also need to be, flexible in our definition of adequate broadband, right? During the pandemic, the FCC defined sort of that adequate broadband as 100 megs down, 20 megs up, right? USDA decided to go more symmetrical with 100 megs down, 100 megs up. But who knows in a matter of years if we'll need some additional bandwidth due to the advent of emerging technologies. So yeah, we'll need to be a lot more flexible, review our guidelines year after year to see if they're serving populations really well or if they're, creating another digital divide inevitably, right? So yeah, hard to answer right now. This is a very non-answer to your question, but these are things that we should be looking out for. Yeah.
I think it's actually really fascinating though, right? Because there is so much evolution with some of these, additional digital ecosystems that we're seeing built, that it is something we have to monitor very closely, very regularly, and it's so important for the generation that is going to be entering the workforce over the next decade, to stay in the loop, right? And to stay informed on this issue of connectivity. Because it is our digital world. We're the first digital native generation, and so it is quite literally the world as we know it, right? Digitally incorporated, and so I think it's a conversation where the stakes are particularly high for Gen Z and generations to come. But being the first digital native generation, I think it's something to monitor that we don't think about often. but we should. Yahaira, I'm particularly interested to know, like, if we were talking to our young farmers on the ground, and we were talking about like infrastructure investments in some of these connectivity priorities, access, um, what would be their biggest priority? What do they need to be better served in rural America?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I could talk about the biggest priority as these issues don't exist in a silo. They are
Mm.
interconnected to many of how these farmers exist in these spaces. And if they're not taking care of mental health or their physical health, of course, that affects their operation. But if they don't have internet, of course, that also affects their operation. So it's not enough just to get a signal. Farmers need fast and affordable internet paired with places where they can learn how to make the most out of it. We need to strengthen the local networks farmers rely on, trusted local and FSA offices, extension agents, rural universities, peer-to-peer learning groups. These are all first lines of defense of helping young farmers access new technology, share innovative practices, and feel less alone in adapting to a rapidly changing agricultural economy. Infrastructure is not only just about the fiber or towers, although that is important. It's also about making sure farmers can connect to each other and research and in real time support when they need it the most. And farming has always been a job built on resilience, but it's also one that could feel very lonely for young farmers who aren't just looking for faster internet, but also looking for connection to each other, to innovative research, to real-time answers, to help them farm better, build stronger businesses. Technology has been a power to bridge those gaps. And if only we center people in how we build it, the future isn't just about smart sensors and automated tractors. It's also about ensuring every farmer, whether they're on 5 acres or 500, can have access to tools, support, and community so they have everything that they need to thrive and create a sustainable agriculture future.
That's so well said. I appreciate that so much. It is holistic, and I feel like that's very Gen Z um, as well to say, like, we're looking at the whole person, and there's a whole person experience there. And this isn't just to the benefit and value of their profession as farmers, but also of them as people, right? Like Gen Z wants to be connected and wants to have that like access. And there's no reason why we shouldn't just because we chose to be a farmer and are living in rural America. And I think so oftentimes we think about like, you know, opportunity being in urban areas or us having to be in urban areas. The pandemic let us know that's not necessarily needed anymore, right? Like you can be anywhere and have opportunity and but the access is kind of the critical piece there. And I think it's so important. We could keep talking about that forever, right? Because there's also like this conversation about like mental health and the way that Gen Z is leading the charge in like telehealth for like therapy. And of course, you know, therapy is harder to find in rural communities, and so there's a value there as well around access. Yeah, such a great point. It just got me excited there. Um, I want to ask one final question here to both of you, which is, you know, how can Gen Z get involved in this work, or involved in your work around um, some of these advancements that are being worked on?
Yeah, so I could go first. First, advocate for broadband as a basic utility, just like electricity and water. In this era, now it's more important than ever. Second, share your stories. Policy change happens when lawmakers hear their constituents' digital access impacts on their real lives. And that goes so far in hearing directly from their constituents. And third, support local and national campaigns pushing for rural broadband investments. At Young Farmer, we are actively building platforms for young people to speak out. We are actually hosting a congressional briefing tomorrow on how farmers are being affected by the recent administration's federal funding freezes. But without internet connectivity, our farmers wouldn't be able to join the Zoom call. And it's as simple as that. Like, we're able to connect farmer leaders to their congressional offices and making sure their voices are heard. And without that, yeah, we need voices to be heard. And now more than ever, we have the accessibility and we need to use that to our advantages. So Young Farmers invites everyone to join us in shaping the digital future and include rural America, where young farmers and young people want to live and also farm and thrive.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing.
I'll follow up with more, I guess, like generic kind of tips and things like that. First, stay informed, right? There's a lot of different resources out there. Personally, recommend the daily newsletter that the Benton Institute sends out. They keep me informed on policy conversations on all the time. So sign up for that free resource. There's communities like the National Digital Inclusion Alliance that provides access to different organizations, putting in the work day in and day out to connect all communities. So those two organizations definitely keep me up to speed on all the different things. To keep an eye on the states. Next few years are going to be critical as states begin implementing like their digital equity plans and their BEAD plans that they've been working on for the last 4 or 5 years. So keep an eye out on the states for the next couple of years and focus your advocacy efforts there too. And then engage with your representatives on ongoing needs, like Yahaira talked about, reach out to your state and federal representatives' offices around the needs that continue to need support, whether that be around education or farming, all the different things that we talked about today. Supply them with actionable data and the stories that they can use to advocate for different legislative priorities. SETA and our members will be on the Hill next week for our annual advocacy summit to talk about these issues that we talked about during this conversation. So yeah, engage with your representatives. They're not scary. Their staffers are really nice. They want to hear from you. So please, please, please engage in those conversations.
Excellent points. Really appreciate both of you sharing that. And yeah, I mean, I would say ditto to that. I think it's so important for us to continue to engage, stay connected, engage our policymakers at all levels, right? To better learn about some of these priorities that are being charted out and make sure that we're communicating the importance to us as a generation of these priorities. We will also be on the Hill over the course of the next couple of weeks, and so really excited to hopefully run into all of you all as well. And the fact that we are, actively engaged at that federal level as well, I think is wonderful. I want to open it up for our Q&A portion to see if there are any questions that we have from the audience here. And I'm going to go ahead and ask my team to help us with those questions if we want to take a couple of questions here.
Yeah, at the moment we just have one, and it looks like it's targeted towards Jahaira. It's on farming policy. Have there been local efforts to train future farmers using new technologies? Where are these conversations in the future of rural labor force being had in these local spaces?
Yeah, so I specifically work on the policy team and we focus on federal policy instead of more local. But we also have our organizing team that focuses on our farmers connecting through chapters. And so we have chapters all over the country, and a lot of them are very involved in their local governments. And sometimes it's as simple as trying to be more involved. And if you would like to reach out, I could give out my email so I can connect you to the rest of the team so we could get more specific, I guess, answers to where these conversations are being had. But a lot of this happens like in local spaces of like um, town halls, things like that. And so it's as in showing up to those events. Mm.
Great question. And I think, yeah, super excited to see if we can make some of those connections there to the folks that you all engage with on the ground. Any other questions from the Q&A, Lucas? Cool. Well, this has been a tremendous conversation. I want to say thank you so much, Yahaira and Jisoo, for your insights, your leadership, and for your commitment to helping us build a better digital world. I want to say thank you to everyone who joined us today. Your engagement is what makes these conversations real and relevant. At ZETA, we believe Gen Z isn't just the future of tech, we're shaping it right now. But to do that, we need access, we need skills, and we need each other. If you want to stay involved, make sure you follow ZETA at Connect ZETA on all social media platforms. Check out our website, connectzeta.org, and join our network at Connect ZETA. We got more tech talks coming up, podcasts, and organizing opportunities in the weeks to come. Next month's webinar is going to be on economic opportunities in the digital age for workers and entrepreneurs. Until next time, stay connected, stay curious, and keep building a digital future that includes all of us. Thank you all so much.